He is an anesthesiologist, his life is nothing special. In his spare time, he often participates in writing some role-playing game scripts, also known as kill scripts. This helps him relax a bit. Just finished a script. On the first cover there is a mysterious sentence: "Evil always starts from the small hidden corners that we do not pay attention to." He poured himself a glass of wine, leaned against his girlfriend's chest. She was so beautiful, her eyes were bright like a wild deer, making him fascinated. His girlfriend put her arms around his neck, gently asked, "How is the story in this script?" His fingers stroked her long eyelashes, softly said, "A serial murder case. It is based on the real-life experience of a friend." His girlfriend was curious, "Which friend?" He took a sip of wine. Wu Yi. Wu Yi, a person who goes against the norm. In a prestigious family of doctors, he should have followed the path his parents had laid out for him: choose the natural sciences, pass the entrance exam to a top medical school, go straight to a doctorate, and then marry a girl of equal social status. But he absolutely hated the smell of antiseptic. After a summer of resistance, even resorting to self-harm, he finally made his parents give in and let him study social sciences. However, after choosing literature, his life was quite smooth. Wu Yi studied history and chose to study the Qing dynasty for his master's degree, a field he loved, but what was not smooth was love. He fell in love with a girl named Nguyen, but his parents strongly opposed it. Despite his opposition, Wu Yi was determined to be with Nguyen. In the winter of his final year of his master's degree, Wu Yi brought Nguyen home to meet his family. Unexpectedly, his parents threw away all the gifts she brought, not even letting her enter the house. His father scolded him with venomous words: "You have no looks and no talent, yet you still love this ordinary girl? Are you trying to drag the whole family down to the bottom of society?" Wu Yi was angry that her parents only cared about the rich and the poor, so she took Nguyen to her home in a remote countryside. There, Nguyen said that her father was an uneducated man who worked in a restaurant and was very strict. Wu Yi did not expect that strictness could be so extreme. That day, as soon as she got home, her father snatched her suitcase, checked every item inside, and even smelled her clothes to ask how many days it had been since they had washed them. When he discovered an open box of condoms in her makeup bag, he suddenly went crazy. Despite Wu Yi's explanation, Nguyen's father still kicked him out. Finally, Nguyen angrily shouted at her father, "If you don't let me stay with Wu Yi, I will die." A few minutes later, Nguyen's father finally calmed down, staring at Wu Yi with eyes that seemed to want to tear him apart. Wu Yi felt that the atmosphere in the house was too suffocating. Father Nguyen did not look too old, his back was slightly hunched, his appearance was rustic, but his eyes were sharp. After entering the house, he did not say a word to Noda, but took out a bottle of good wine to entertain the guests. When Noda suggested going out for dinner, he coldly dismissed it: "No need, stay at home." Then, he put on an apron and went to the kitchen to cook. Noda secretly breathed a sigh of relief. After all, Father Nguyen did not look like an easy person to deal with. In the meantime, Nguyen told him to go wash the fruit. Noda looked at Nguyen's small, old apartment, which had 2 bedrooms. One of them was only half closed, with a strange talisman pasted on it. He felt like something was wrong inside the room. There seemed to be a sobbing sound. As he approached, a terrible stench came from the crack in the door, like the smell of rotten meat mixed with the smell of a public toilet in the middle of summer. Suddenly, a hand patted him on the shoulder. Noda turned around in surprise and saw that it was Nguyen. He tried to suppress his fear and joked, "Is this smell from your father's feet?" Nguyen pouted, raised his finger to his lips to signal silence. "It's Grandma." Nguyen turned on the light in the room and pulled him in. Only to see a small, dirty room with a chamber pot placed next to it. On the bed was an old, haggard woman, sleeping soundly like a corpse. Nguyen choked and said, "This is Grandma. When she was young, she was very beautiful, a teacher. But when she was 29, she was raped by a hooligan. That person later became my grandfather. No one understood why she married him. After that, she started having psychological problems. My mother also cut off contact with the family a long time ago." After he passed away, she was taken care of by my father. Speaking of this, Nguyen's eyes filled with tears. She must have wet the bed again. I'll go get a basin of water to wipe her body. Nguyen left, leaving Noda sitting next to the bed. Looking at the old woman, he felt sympathy. Suddenly, the stench became stronger, as if coming from under the blanket. Wu Yi was about to lift the blanket to see, when suddenly the old lady opened her eyes. Her eyes were as sharp as knives. She grabbed his hand and shouted, "Murderer!" Wu Yi was terrified. Right after that, there were hurried footsteps from behind. He turned around and saw Father Nguyen rushing towards him with a large knife in his hand. The blade still had some leaves stuck to it. Father Nguyen roared and asked, "Who allowed you to touch it?" Wu Yi swallowed his saliva in panic, turned around and saw the old lady's cloudy eyes, drool still flowing from the corner of her mouth, completely the appearance of a person who had lost her mind, very different from her appearance just now. Wu Yi felt that everything was strange, but did not dare to ask more. He could only say, "I just want to visit her." Father Nguyen said in a low voice, "She just took medicine, she's resting, don't bother her." Wu Yi hurriedly nodded, "Yes, yes." In the evening, around 6 o'clock. During the meal, Father Nguyen served a table full of food. His cooking skills were not bad. He kept picking up meat for his daughter, while he only ate vegetables, occasionally saying a few words. "Wu, you're quite good." Ngu was annoyed, used chopsticks to press down his father's hand, said, "Dad, can you stop talking? Don't force me to leave like Mom." Father Nguyen glanced at his daughter, didn't say anything more. The meal passed in a heavy atmosphere. Around 6:20, Nguyen coughed lightly, said to her father, "Our house is too small, not convenient. We've booked a hotel room, we'll come back this afternoon." After saying that, she lightly kicked Wu Yi's leg under the table. Wu Yi understood, and nodded. But Father Nguyen just calmly replied, "Tonight, Mr. No will sleep in the guest house with me. You stay and take care of Grandma." After hearing this, No sighed in his heart. The hotel in the district town had very bad facilities, poor soundproofing. The room next door had a couple screaming with joy. The echoes seemed to tear the space apart. Meanwhile, Noda was sitting with Father Nguyen drinking wine and eating some snacks. The atmosphere became strange and awkward. Father Nguyen took a sip of wine, suddenly asked, "How does it feel?" Noda was stunned. "Yes, what?" Father Nguyen narrowed his eyes. "How does it feel with my daughter? Is it refreshing?" Noda felt extremely uncomfortable in his heart. How could a father ask his future son-in-law such a sick question? However, he still tried to stay calm, raised his hand and swore, "She is the first and only girl in my life. I will spend my whole life loving her." His words were completely sincere. With his clean nature, he always considered Nguyen a pure lotus flower. Father Nguyen drank 2 more cups of wine, his eyes staring at Noda as if he wanted to eat him alive. A long time later, he said a threatening sentence, "Never betray." Noda did not understand. "Yes, what do you mean?" Father Nguyen rubbed his temples, said softly, "If you dare to betray, I will kill you." Noda hurriedly poured wine for his father, tremblingly replied, "I don't dare, I swear never." After 1 a.m., the two had finished 2 bottles of Moutai and a case of beer. It was pitch black, and only the sound of snoring could be heard echoing in the hotel. At around 6 a.m., Wu Yi was woken up by Father Nguyen. Wu Yi reluctantly got dressed and followed his father. It was still early in the morning, and only a few cleaning staff were working on the street. Wu Yi and Father Nguyen walked through the small alleys to go home. But as soon as they arrived, he felt something was wrong. The door was only half closed, and the lights were not on like yesterday. "What's going on?" Father Nguyen whispered. The two entered the house. The living room was dark, but the lights in the bedroom were bright. Father Nguyen called out loudly, "Nguyen?" When they entered the room, they saw that the room was empty and messy with condom wrappers, stained bed sheets, and a discarded men's leather belt. Obviously, the room had just gone through a crazy orgy. Father Nguyen was furious, grabbed Noda's collar and roared, "Damn it, did you trick me into sneaking back here after getting drunk yesterday?" Noda quickly shook his head like a rattle. "I'm even drunker than you. I slept like I was dead. Father Nguyen let go, also seeing that No Da's words made sense. But if it wasn't him, then who was it? At this moment, both of them looked at each other, their thoughts clear. Nguyen had been framed. The next time No Da saw Nguyen was at a deserted garbage dump. She was thrown there, naked, her body covered in whip marks, blood flowing from between her legs, her beautiful eyes gouged out. No Da felt dizzy, everything before her eyes was black. Nguyen was not only raped, but also brutally tortured. Who was the culprit? Father Nguyen knelt down, hugged his daughter's body tightly, and cried out in pain, "My child, who hurt you like this?" No Da still had some reason, intending to stop Father Nguyen from touching the body, to protect the scene. But before he could say anything, Father Nguyen pressed his hand on Nguyen's chest, shouting, "The girl is still warm, call an ambulance now." Both 120, ambulance, and 110, police, were called. No Da was the one who made both calls. The district hospital was not qualified. Nguyen fell into a coma and was in critical condition many times, and needed to be transferred to a higher level. The police helped clear the way, and the ambulance drove straight to the city. This case was serious. Nguyen was the direct victim and also the most important witness. She had to live to serve the investigation. On the way, the district doctor reported the situation. The patient was 2 months pregnant, brutally beaten, leading to a miscarriage. The garbage environment was too poor, which caused the victim's wound to become seriously infected. In addition, according to the test results, the victim had undergone at least 2 abortions or premature births. Wu Yi was stunned. Nguyen had said that this was her first serious relationship, but she had been pregnant twice. Moreover, she had a history of abortion before. So, who was responsible for the murder of Nguyen this time? The father of the child in her womb? A feeling of unease rose in Wu Ye's heart. He suddenly looked towards Nguyen's father. While Nguyen was being treated, the police came to question him. They asked No Da about his relationship with the victim, whether there was any conflict, who was with her last night, what they did, when was the last time he saw Nguyen. Then they asked Nguyen's father about Nguyen's social relationships, who she had known, and whether she had any grudges against anyone. Nguyen's father said that his daughter was very obedient and filial. In the district capital, there were indeed many young men pursuing her, but he strictly forbade love affairs. As he spoke, he sobbed and cursed No Da as a beast who had made his daughter pregnant. The police turned to No Da and asked, "Is the child in Nguyen's belly yours?" Because of his self-respect, No Da could only grit his teeth and admit. The policeman's expression became solemn. "Mr. No, to help solve the case, I hope you will answer honestly." Wu Yi was silent for a long time, realizing that the police must have gotten some clue, so he cautiously said, "This is my first time having sex, the child cannot be mine." The police continued to ask, "During the time we were in love, did you discover that Nguyen had any unusual connections with the opposite sex?" Wu Ye's self-esteem was crushed, he couldn't help but break his restraint. "No. In front of me, she acted more innocent than pure milk. Who would have thought that the past would be so colorful? Telling me to meet her parents, it turns out I was just a scapegoat. Damn, I almost became the father of someone else's child." The police glared at him, only reminding him, "If you have more information, call them immediately." The case is under investigation. The police did not reveal too much, only 2 details were provided. They asked the neighbors. Last night, there were no unusual signs from Nguyen. There were no signs of forced entry into the house. However, at around 12:30 a.m., a witness saw Nguyen walking into the house with a man. However, it was too dark for the witness to see the man's face clearly. The whip marks on Nguyen's body were caused by a belt. Other serious injuries included a severe kick to the abdomen that led to a miscarriage. The fatal wound was a beating with a crowbar-like tool. Both of the victims' eyes were gouged out, and have not been found yet. Finally, the police said they tried to question Nguyen's grandmother, but because she was confused, she could not provide any useful information. Around 6 p.m. No Da stood next to the hospital, lit a cigarette, took a long drag, the smoke made his throat sting, and he coughed so hard that he gagged. His mother had taught him since he was young that smoking was harmful to his health and could lead to lung cancer. But now, only nicotine could help him ease this emotional breakdown. The cigarette smoke was hazy and lingering around his head. Noda wiped his face, constantly blaming himself. The Nguyen he once thought was pure and belonged to him, was now completely exposed by the cruel truth. Noda slapped himself in the face, feeling so pitiful. Even though Nguyen betrayed him like that, he still withdrew 10,000 VND from his card and gave it to Nguyen's father to help with the treatment. He just curled his lips and laughed at himself, stupid. Maybe she has some personal troubles. Damn, I'm such an idiot. At this moment, he saw Nguyen's father coming out of the hospital, calling on the phone and waving to call a Santana. Noda frowned. In fact, he always had a suspicion in his heart. Nguyen's father's attitude was somehow unusual. For example, he checked his daughter's luggage without avoiding it, and even picked up her clothes to smell to see if they had been washed. Or like last night at the hotel, he suddenly said coldly, "Don't betray." Then the next morning, tragedy happened. There were only 2 bedrooms in the house, and besides Nguyen's grandmother, her father was often there. So what did Father Nguyen have to do with it? Even the fact that he pressed his hand on Nguyen's chest to resuscitate him made him feel extremely uncomfortable. A horrifying thought flashed through Noda's mind. Could it be that Father Nguyen had ever molested his daughter? He recalled a time Nguyen told about her family situation. When she was young, Nguyen's biological mother had an affair and left. Not long after, her father remarried a stepmother. This stepmother was very cruel, often abusing and beating her. Her father often argued with her stepmother to protect her, but in the end she died of illness. Noda hurriedly called a taxi, telling the driver, "Follow the Santana ahead." As expected, Nguyen's father had returned to the district. It took about an hour and a half from the city center to the district. Noda wandered around Nguyen's father's apartment complex, hands in his pockets, eyes looking up at the apartment on the top floor. The lights were still on. The cold wind made him shiver. He lit a cigarette again, but this time he didn't smoke it, just held it in his hand. He intended to call the police to ask about the progress of the case as well as share his suspicions about Nguyen's father. But he hesitated. Am I too suspicious? Could it be that I even suspect Nguyen's biological father? At that moment, an unfamiliar phone number called. Noda picked up the phone. Hello? On the other end of the line was a familiar voice. You've been standing there watching for a while, aren't you going to come up? It was Nguyen's father. Noda was stunned, the cigarette in his mouth fell to the ground. It turned out he had known for a long time. An invisible fear rose up. Noda hesitated for 2 seconds, then walked over. Noda slowly lifted the door and looked inside. Inside was an old kitchen, the washing machine was spinning loudly, the coal stove was burning, steam covered the glass door. Nguyen's father was using a mop to clean the floor, muttering curses, "You bastard, those policemen took all my bedding." We stood there, coldly saying, maybe the police took it away as evidence. There might be semen or a piece of skin on it, enough for them to extract DNA. Nguyen's father glanced at him. You're not taking care of the hospital, why did you come here? Following me? We avoided his sharp gaze. There are police on duty at the hospital, I'm just waiting for news. But the murderer often returns to the scene, so I want to try to see if I can find anything. Nguyen's father coldly replied, find anything? Wei shook his head, nothing yet. But he mustered up all his courage and asked again, the matter is not clear, why are you in such a hurry to come back here? Father Nguyen spat a mouthful of saliva, go home, are you going to let my mother starve to death? Wei thought, this answer was not unusual. Suddenly, he sensed danger. Just as he raised his head, he saw Father Nguyen rushing straight towards him. Wei did not have time to react. Father Nguyen strangled him, pressed him to the floor. He heard a cracking sound as if his neck was locked. The survival instinct arose. Wei tried to pull Father Nguyen's hand away, his voice hoarse, Uncle. Uncle, let me go. But Father Nguyen showed no emotion, the grip became stronger, even stepping on Noye's foot to control him. At this moment, Wu realized that this rustic, shabby man had a completely different side, cold, cruel and extremely dangerous. Father Wen stared at him, gritting his teeth and saying, "The murderer did return to the scene, but wasn't it you?" Wu couldn't say anything, his neck was so tight that he couldn't breathe, his vision began to blur. Suddenly, Father Wen loosened his grip. Wu collapsed to the floor, clutching his neck and coughing, trying to take in every breath of air. Before he could take 2 breaths, a loud slap made his head dizzy. "Then tell me," Father Wen shouted. Hot blood rushed to his face, Wu couldn't hold it in any longer, he rushed forward, using his head to hit Father Wen's stomach, angrily shouting, "I still don't know who the murderer is. If you hadn't dragged me to the hotel yesterday, would things have ended up like this? I came back here just to investigate, who the hell put the green hat on my head?" Father Wen was pushed back a few steps, silent for a moment, then sneered, "Take back your 10,000 dong, from now on don't show up again. Get lost." Noda replied with a strained neck, "I haven't investigated the case yet, I'm not going anywhere. If she's my lover, I have the duty to protect her." Father Wen disdained, "Lover? A short guy like you is worthy?" Wuda hated being mocked for his height the most, he gritted his teeth, "At least better than a shameless old man like you." At this moment, the kettle on the stove made a piercing sound. The space in the living room suddenly became quiet, only the ticking of the wall clock remained. Father Wen looked at Noda for a moment, then turned to the kitchen, poured a basin of hot water, and went straight to the bedroom. Wuda held his neck in pain, leaned against the wall to stand up, and staggered to chase after him. As soon as he reached the bedroom door, he saw Father Wen sitting on a chair, wringing out a wet towel, wiping Grandma Wen's face. The old lady was lying on her back on the bed, her face still as dull as ever. Father Wen wiped his mother's face and sighed, "Mom, tell me. Who came into our house last night?" The old lady did not respond, just looking at the ceiling with a lifeless gaze. Father Wen's eyes turned cold, his voice choked, "Mom, after all, he is your nephew. He is in the hospital, I don't know if he will make it through the night. Mom, please, just say one word." Suddenly, the old lady turned her head to look at him, and finally opened her mouth, hungry. The veins on Father Nguyen's forehead immediately bulged, and his eyes that had been filled with tears just now suddenly became fierce. Something bad happened. Noda stood outside, feeling that the situation was not good, and was about to step in. At that moment, he saw Father Nguyen suddenly jump up, using a wet towel, to hit the old lady repeatedly. "Eat. All day long only know how to eat. Useless old man." Wei rushed in panic, blocking Father Nguyen's hand. "What are you doing? Grandma is senile, how can you treat her like that?" Father Nguyen pushed Wei away, pulled the blanket over the old lady's face, cursed and used all his strength to press down. Wei was horrified at the scene before him. "Let go." He tried his best to pull Father Nguyen away, but couldn't move her. Finally, he pulled the blanket away. But it was too late, the old lady was no longer breathing. Her face was tilted to one side, her eyes still wide open, not closed. Wei was stunned, not believing that he had just witnessed a murder. And the murderer was the son who killed his biological mother. He turned to look at Father Nguyen with a disgusted look. Father Nguyen calmly wiped his sweat, took a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and smoked, his face showing no sign of remorse. "You are an animal. You killed my mother." Wei screamed. Father Nguyen curled his lips and sneered, "It's my mother. Raise her, then raise her, kill her, then kill her. So, what are you going to do?" Wei couldn't believe his ears, he stepped back, put his hand in his pocket, and clenched his phone tightly. Father Nguyen took a drag of his cigarette, exhaled the smoke, and said coldly, "What? Want to call the police?" Wei quickly analyzed the situation. Even though he had beaten Father Nguyen, he was not strong enough to win. If a fight broke out, he would definitely lose. If he tried to run out and call the police, in case of failure, he might slip and fall down the stairs, or even lose his life. Wei was so nervous that he couldn't breathe, and he slowly retreated. Old Nguyen threw down the cigarette and used his toe to extinguish it. The door is locked from the inside, you need a key to open it, and the windows are also equipped with anti-theft nets. Wu immediately felt suffocated, and turned his head to run towards the door. When he reached the door, he tried his best to turn the handle, but just as Old Nguyen said, he couldn't open it at all. Wu shouted with all his might, "Help me! Is there anyone there?" But behind him, Old Nguyen's deep voice rang out. The walls were lined with soundproof cotton when the house was renovated, and the glass was also soundproof. Wu felt like he was falling into an abyss. The footsteps from behind got closer and closer, each step seemed to stomp on his heart. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Wu's throat was dry, he slowly turned his head, and saw Old Nguyen holding a rope, smiling as he stood in front of him. Wu was beaten up badly, and finally tied up. In his daze, he saw Old Nguyen take out a knife about 20 centimeters long from the house and slowly walk towards him. Wu was immediately terrified, crying and begging, "Uncle! Uncle Nguyen, I beg you to spare me, I swear I won't say anything. About Grandma's case, everyone will think she lost her temper, no one will suspect anything. My parents worked hard to raise me." Shoo! Old Nguyen stood right in front of Wu, bent down, used the tip of the knife to lightly stab his crotch, and said with a smile, "Foster daughter, are you feeling better?" Wu felt that this man was crazy. In his panic, he quickly thought of a way. "My parents, they call me every day. If they can't contact me, they will definitely call the police." Old Nguyen didn't care at all. "Do you think I'm afraid?" Wu's face was full of tears. "Uncle, I will give you 10,000 yuan for the hospital fee, just to show you some face, please forgive me." Old Nguyen waved his hand and slapped him hard. "My adopted daughter, only I can take care of her." Wu was desperate. Unexpectedly, Old Nguyen suddenly stopped. "What do you know, you are a rich kid after all." Wu seemed to have found a lifeline. "Yes, yes, yes. Uncle Nguyen, I will go back and give you the money." Old Nguyen smiled, "But you have to do something first." Wu hurriedly asked, "Do what?" Old Nguyen raised his chin and pointed towards the bedroom. "Cut up my mother's body." Wu completely understood Old Nguyen's intentions. As long as he participated in the dismemberment, the two of them would be like fish on the same rope, unable to escape. Moreover, Old Nguyen's words of "rich kid" just now definitely implied that he would be used to blackmail him in the future. Thinking of his sophistication, tricks, and calculations, Wu couldn't help but doubt, is he really just an ordinary restaurant owner? Old Nguyen seemed to lose his patience. "Do you do it or not?" Wu cried and shook his head. Grandma had no grudges or enmity, how could he do anything to her? Old Nguyen gritted his teeth. "Useless thing. Coward." At this moment, the phone in Old Nguyen's pocket rang. Wu hurriedly shouted, "Listen, uncle, answer. It might be a call from the hospital." "Shut up." Old Nguyen covered Wu's mouth, and with his other hand took out his phone to answer the call. As soon as he picked up the phone, a strange man's voice rang out, "Mr. Nguyen, is everything okay with you?" Old Nguyen frowned, "Still in the hospital emergency room." The man said, "This matter is really not certain. I heard that the workers at the chemical factory were drinking wine and grilling meat, and one of them was drunk and recalled yesterday's murder case. Think carefully, do you need to call the police?" "No." Old Nguyen immediately stopped him, his expression changing unpredictably. "You guys try to hold them back, I'll be there soon." After hanging up, Old Nguyen stood in the middle of the living room, one hand on his hip, took out a cigarette, and smoked while thinking about something. After a few seconds, as if he had made up his mind, he quickly went to the balcony, brought in a suitcase, rope, and tape. Wu was shocked, trembling, and asked, "What are you going to do? If you get caught, you won't be able to run away." "I can help you." Old Nguyen smiled faintly. "Help me? Then run away and call the police?" Wu really couldn't think of any other way, but of course he couldn't tell the truth. "You are my adopted daughter, we are family. I definitely won't hurt you." Old Nguyen picked up a rolling pin as big as his bicep, slowly walked in front of Noda, and raised it high. At that moment, Noda's fear reached its peak. He knew he was finished, the old man would definitely kill him to silence him. A sharp pain in the back of his neck made him feel disconnected, and then he fell into a deep coma. Noda woke up, because of the intense pain. It was as if thousands of needles were piercing his body. He was in a daze, and found himself hidden under the bed. His legs were tied tightly, his mouth was stuffed with cloth and wrapped with tape. He couldn't speak, only able to make a few weak sounds. Noda used all his strength, trying to struggle free from the rope, but accidentally touched something, making him shiver in surprise. He tried to turn his head, just in time to meet someone's eyes. It was Grandma Gwen. She still had her lifeless eyes open, staring at the empty space in front of her. Wei immediately felt a chill down his spine, almost peeing his pants, his whole body struggling like a fish out of water. Outside the living room, there was a sound of talking. Who was it? The police or the neighbors? Wei tried to raise his head, seeing that although the bedroom was closed, there was still a small gap. The pale yellow light from the living room shone in through the gap. The desire to live made him gather unimaginable strength, crawling closer to that gap, bit by bit. Looking out through the gap, he felt half cold. Old Win was tying up another man, the other person was tightly wrapped in rope. It was a chemical factory worker, wearing a dirty uniform, looking disheveled, his face full of traces of being beaten. Old Win rolled up his sleeves, slapped Mao hard, causing blood to flow from his nose. I'll ask you again, why did you kill my daughter? Mao cried and trembled. No, uncle, I really didn't kill you. I was just drunk and bragging to my friends. Old Win grabbed Mao's neck and shook him. I've asked before, there's your blood on my daughter's body. You dare to lie again? There are even footprints at the scene, you went back to the crime scene yourself. Tell me, what is your relationship with my daughter? Why did you dig up the body? Mao's eyes flashed with fear, but he was still stubborn. I don't know your daughter, I swear to God. Old Nguyen ran out of patience, and pulled Mao closer to a meat grinder. Do you know what this does? Just press the button, and you'll be ground into minced meat, add some onions, ginger, and garlic, and it'll be enough to wrap dumplings. Mao was so scared that his whole body trembled. Old Nguyen patted Mao's head. If I don't use this machine, I'll use a knife to chop it up, and the meat will be even finer. Mao was drenched in sweat, tears streaming down his face like rain, his mouth stammering, Uncle, please forgive me. I saw your daughter yesterday, but I really didn't kill her. Old Nguyen grabbed Mao's neck, growling, Speak more clearly. Mao swallowed his saliva, panting and replied, Yesterday, on the way home from work at night, I saw your daughter and Teacher Gua talking in the alley. Old Nguyen's eyes suddenly flashed. Teacher Gua? Who is he? Is he her homeroom teacher? Mao nodded. Yes, Teacher Gua used to be my homeroom teacher, but he's a bad person. Because of his wife's affair, he lost his reputation, and now he lives in Happiness District 5. He used to beat his wife to vent his anger, and he has a very bad temper. Old Nguyen interrupted. Don't talk about unrelated things. Did you see Teacher Gua kill someone? Mao shook his head. No, I only saw Teacher Gua hugging and kissing her. She didn't agree, cried and tried to stay away. She said she had a boyfriend and was about to get engaged, but Teacher Gua still deliberately threatened her. He said if she dared to resist, he would take her father to the police station. He said this would definitely cause a riot. Hearing this, Lao Nguyen's whole body trembled with anger. What happened next? Mao gasped. After that, Teacher Gua still hugged her, kissed and groped her, and finally dragged her away. Lao Nguyen hit Mao hard with a rolling pin. Is that all? Is there anything else? Mao cried like rain. There really is nothing else. At that time I was exhausted from working the night shift, I didn't have the energy to listen to the news. When I saw him doing those despicable things, I immediately turned away. Lao Nguyen slapped Mao hard on the face. Who gave you permission to say I'm despicable? Mao was so scared that he cowered and hurriedly corrected himself. No, it's my mother is despicable. Uncle, I really don't know anything, please forgive me. Old Nguyen didn't say anything, he just used a rolling pin to beat Mao until he was unconscious. After that, he stuffed a rag into Mao's mouth, locked him in the closet and turned away. But for some reason, old Nguyen felt like there was a thorn in his back, so he turned around quickly. Wu Ye's breath froze, and he quickly crawled under the bed. As soon as he lay down, he heard the creak sound of the door opening. Wu Ye tried to hold his breath. Old Nguyen walked in, wearing a pair of plastic slippers that made a clattering sound, and walked straight to the bed. Wu Ye's back was drenched in sweat. Cold sweat, hot sweat, his whole body was soaked. He told himself to stay calm, not to leave any traces. Wu Ye tried to lie still, to the point that his head almost touched Mrs. Nguyen's body. It was cold. Old Nguyen sat down, knelt on one knee, and looked carefully under the bed. 1 second, 2 seconds. Wu Ye felt old Nguyen's sharp gaze sweep over him, making him shiver, not daring to move. After about a minute, old Nguyen stood up and left. Wu Ye breathed a sigh of relief, but as soon as he turned around, he saw old Nguyen standing right in front of him. Wu Ye's entire body froze, old Nguyen's eyes sparkled under the light, the corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. However, he did nothing, only saying one sentence, "Stay there obediently, I still have work to do." After saying that, he left. Wu Ye watched as he left the house, finally breathing a sigh of relief. But at that moment, he heard the sound of lights and the door locking from outside. The room immediately fell into silence, terrifyingly quiet. Wu Ye quickly found Teacher Guo's apartment, on the first floor, room 101. He stood in front of the door, hesitated for a few seconds, then decided to knock. No one answered. He continued to knock. "Uncle Nguyen, are you in there?" Still silent. A moment later, old Nguyen appeared, pulling him inside. "Little brat, what are you doing?" Old Nguyen grabbed Wu Ye's collar, pushed him against the wall, and asked loudly, "Where's Mao?" Wu Ye was so scared that he trembled. "Mao. He's still at home." He began to feel regretful. Looking at the room, the space was quite clean. On the wall hung an artistic photo of a girl. On the floor was a middle-aged man around 40 years old, slightly bald, not looking too bad, but clearly had just been beaten, with many wounds on his body. Wu Ye frowned. "Is this Teacher Guo?" Old Nguyen nodded. Wu Ye gritted his teeth and asked, "Uncle, have you asked him yet?" Old Nguyen's eyes looked coldly at Teacher Guo. "This dog, I questioned him all afternoon, he didn't say anything." Wu Ye couldn't control himself, he shook off old Nguyen's hand, and rushed towards Teacher Guo. He jumped up, pressed Teacher Guo down, and punched him repeatedly. "Huh? Tell me. What did you do last night? Huh?" Teacher Guo fell down but didn't fight back, just curled up and took the blows, gritted his teeth and said, "If you suspect me of murder, just call the police. Let the law punish me." Old Nguyen pulled Wu Ye up. "Get out of the way, it's not your turn to do this." Wu Ye stood up, panting, then suddenly noticed the smartphone on the table. He walked over, picked up the phone, turned around and asked Teacher Guo, "What's the unlock password?" Teacher Guo pursed his lips, not saying a word. Wu Ye grabbed Teacher Guo's hand, pressing it against the fingerprint sensor. Ding! The phone unlocked. Teacher Guo opened his eyes wide in horror. "How do you know how to unlock it?" Wu Ye sneered. "It's not that difficult. Just use my fingerprint." Teacher Guo suddenly panicked. Even though he was tied up, he still madly rushed towards Wu Ye. Wu Ye shouted, "Uncle Nguyen! Hold him back. There must be evidence in here." Old Nguyen kicked Teacher Guo hard, causing him to fall to the ground, his head hitting the edge of the table, blood flowing, and he was half unconscious. Wu Ye didn't care, opened the photo album in his phone. He was stunned when he saw it. In a folder named Private, there were over 2,000 obscene photos. The photo information showed that the time span was over the past 2 years. Old Nguyen saw Wu Ye's expression change and asked, "Did you find something?" Wu Ye silently continued to scroll through the photos. The oldest photos, taken a few years ago, showed Lao Nguyen's daughter wearing her school uniform, her eyes filled with fear, standing in an empty room. Teacher Guo stood next to her, his hand reaching into her collar, smiling sinisterly. The most recent photos were taken the night before. In them, Lao Nguyen's daughter was crying, kneeling on the ground, being beaten by Teacher Guo with a whip. In addition to the photos, there was also a video recording the assault. Wu Ye's tears streamed down, each drop falling onto the phone screen. Lao Nguyen seemed to have gone crazy, rushing forward to grab Teacher Guo by the collar, beating him mercilessly. Wu Ye wiped away his tears, continuing to check the other files. In addition to the photos and videos, there was also a folder containing audio files. There were a total of 4 recordings. He frowned, opened the first part, dated March 6, 2012. In it, Teacher Quach's voice rang out, both depraved and arrogant. There is a girl named Nguyen. After her mother passed away, she lived with her stepmother. She is not educated, but she has a nice figure, especially her breasts. I guess she must be a C-cup. I often find excuses to call her to my private education office. Haha, she is so beautiful. If I don't do it, my whole life will be wasted. The second recording, dated April 7, 2012, Teacher Quach's voice was full of excitement. Today I went to Nguyen's house. Her old man was playing mahjong. I teased her, asked her to make me some tea. She was shy, but I deliberately started a conversation, asked if she knew how to smoke. She was stunned, then went to buy me a pack of cigarettes. When he went out, I walked around the house and entered the old woman's room. She grabbed my hand, her eyes were dull, and said, "Kill someone." I asked again, "Kill who?" She replied, "Kill my wife." Hearing this, Wu Ye remembered the old woman's story last night, but it was clear that she did not kill her wife. He turned to look at old Nguyen. Old Nguyen's eyes were cold as ice, his hands clenched, and he smiled faintly. "Keep listening." Wu Ye gritted his teeth and opened the third paragraph, April 13, 2012. Teacher Quach's voice was arrogant. "Little Nguyen is really stupid. I just need to scare her, and she will confess everything." It turns out, her stepmother had been beating her since she was little, and even threatened to sell her. Her father found out, so he killed his wife. The two of them joined forces to cut up her body and dispose of the evidence. Haha, it turns out that old man killed someone to protect his daughter. Wu Ye was stunned. The truth behind the Nguyen family turned out to be so cruel. He trembled, opening the last paragraph, April 15, 2012. Teacher Guo's voice slurred. "I finally got to touch her. Oh my God, soft, wonderful. Today I also discovered a secret. That old bastard is not the girl's biological father, but only her stepfather. Her biological mother went to live with relatives after the divorce. As for me, I was both happy and knew her weakness." Haha. Wu Ye angrily looked at old Nguyen. Old Nguyen coldly laughed. "How is it, do you understand?" Wu Ye gasped, tears streaming down like a stream. A drop fell to the ground, shattering. It turned out that Wu Ye's girlfriend was originally a lively person, but she always had wounds on her body. The main reason was these painful things. It was hard to imagine that Nguyen had to live in pain for so many years, because he was being stalked, tortured, and threatened by beasts. Noda could no longer hold back and shouted, "That's not your biological daughter." Old Nguyen curled his lips slightly. "So what?" "Noda, take the knife." Noda hurriedly walked to the table, picked up the knife, and raised it, ready to defend himself. Old Nguyen looked at the knife, sneered, and also pulled out a sharp cleaver from behind his back. "What? Want to test your strength with me, little brat?" Noda gasped, continuously retreating, but unfortunately tripped over Teacher Quach's leg, who was lying on the ground, fell down, and the knife in his hand accidentally pierced Teacher Quach's neck. Teacher Quach, who had been half-conscious, was now completely motionless. His body convulsed, blood flowed from his mouth, he kicked his legs a few times, and then died. Wu Ye screamed, dropped the knife, and retreated continuously, his whole body trembling. "I'm dead." Wu Ye was so terrified that he couldn't speak. When he raised his head, old Nguyen was also stunned. Old Nguyen suddenly laughed coldly. "Kid, now you're a murderer." Wu Ye shook his head repeatedly. "No, no. It was an accident. It was negligence. Quickly call the police, call an ambulance." Old Nguyen rolled up his sleeves, and smiled faintly. "I was just worried about how to deal with those who knew about me. Now it's so convenient." I'll say that you killed someone out of anger. And I'm just the one who came later, cleaned up everything, erased the evidence. Then, I called the police. Everything makes sense, right? Wei realized his intentions and shouted, "Don't even dream about it. I won't let you have your way." Old Wen roared, "What did you say?" Old Wen roared, "What did you say?" At this moment, the police siren sounded from outside the window, the lights flashed continuously, a police car was approaching. Old Wen's expression changed, he turned to look at Noda. Noda curled his lips and smiled, "I already called the police before I came here." Old Wen angrily rushed to attack Noda. The two struggled, punching and kicking, putting all their strength into each blow. Suddenly, Old Wen pretended to stop fighting, then unexpectedly turned around to pull the knife from Teacher Quach's neck, stabbing him twice in a row, making sure he was dead. Noda was terrified, looking at Old Wen's crazy actions. Old Wen then quickly took out his phone, stuttered and entered something, then took out the tiny memory card, and swallowed it. Outside, there were hurried footsteps, the door was slammed. Wei shouted, "Help me! Police, help me!" Old Wen quickly stuffed the knife into Noda's hand, leaned close to his ear and said quickly, "I'm done for anyway. But if you don't cooperate, I guarantee your parents will pay." As soon as he finished speaking, the door opened and the police rushed in. The police immediately arrested Old Wen, rescued Noda, and proceeded to search the scene. They found a pair of carefully preserved human eyes in Mr. Quach's refrigerator. With Noda's cooperation, the police found complete evidence in Mr. Quach's phone. After a thorough investigation, Nguyen's case was finally cleared up. The truth is as follows: on December 8, 2014, Mr. Quach threatened Nguyen, forcing her to continue to endure him. This was accidentally discovered by Mao that night. Mr. Quach then used Nguyen to commit acts of violence and abuse, and threatened to reveal their family's secrets if she dared to resist or refuse. Nguyen had a fight with this person. After a strong kick to the stomach, Nguyen had a miscarriage and lost consciousness. In a panic, this person did not take Nguyen to the emergency room but chose to use tools to hide the consequences, causing her death. Teacher Quach, believing in the superstition that the soul cannot take revenge without eyes, operated on Nguyen's eyes. In the end, all the perpetrators were caught. Noda finished telling the story. He hugged his girlfriend tightly, smiling and asked, "How is it? Do you think the story is like a movie script?" His girlfriend rubbed her eyes, trying to suppress her sleepiness. "Very good, honey. I got goosebumps listening to it." Noda gently kissed her forehead, whispering, "Actually. Girlfriend, actually. It's just a normal murder case, lacking a bit of an unexpected twist. But, the fact that Old Nguyen was a cold-blooded murderer but was willing to take all the blame for his daughter, and let Wei live, was truly touching." Wei didn't say anything. The girlfriend sat up and timidly asked, "Honey, what's wrong? The story really isn't bad. I swear, I just don't like the thriller murder genre." Wei laughed and stroked her hair, "Silly girl, it's okay. You're good like this. Anyway, I'm not very good at holding a scalpel, it's not appropriate." Hearing this, the girlfriend clearly breathed a sigh of relief. Wei laughed, "There are 2 more unexpected endings to this story, do you want to hear them?" Just then, the rice cooker beeped. The girlfriend quickly stood up and pointed, "You prepare the food, I'll continue later." After saying that, she hurriedly left as if she wanted to escape. Wei chuckled and shook his head. He poured a glass of wine, and just as he brought it to his lips, the phone rang. "Hello," he answered, a faint smile in his voice. On the other end of the line was a respectful female voice. "Hello Mr. Zhao, according to your instructions, we are still taking care of Miss Nguyen. There is nothing unusual at the moment." Wei took a sip of wine. "Good. What's the latest situation?" "Still the same, no progress. But today a woman named Lu secretly came to visit, stayed for about 20 minutes, and then left." Wei smiled, "Very good." After hanging up, he stood in front of the window, looking out at the night view of the city. Wuye's story still had 2 unexpected endings, they were called secrets. Secret number 1, Old Nguyen. After Old Nguyen was arrested, in addition to the obvious crimes such as killing his mother, killing his wife, and killing teacher Quach, the police also investigated other things. It turns out that Old Nguyen is not who he claims to be. His real name is Wang Junfeng, a serial killer who committed crimes from 1990 to 1995. During this time, he committed at least 12 cases of murder, robbery, rape, and body disposal. After 1995, he suddenly disappeared from the police's radar. For the sake of the story, we will still call him Old Nguyen. In 1995, Old Nguyen decided to give up his wandering life and live in seclusion in a remote area of Guizhou. There, he met a famous surgeon named Liao during a vacation. Old Nguyen came up with a bold idea, to completely change his appearance, to live under a new identity. He and his girlfriend, Li, meticulously planned to kidnap Dr. Liao's wife and son. Under threat, Dr. Liao was forced to perform facial surgery on him. After the successful surgery, Mr. Nguyen killed Dr. Liu's entire family. To tease his girlfriend, he also gouged out the eyes of the doctor and his wife and stepped on them like light bulbs. Returning home, he tried to kill his cousin and take over his identity, even marrying his cousin's wife, to cover up the public. But then the wife discovered the truth and ran away. But the only thing that was not in his calculations was his cousin's daughter. Lai discovered the truth and tortured, beat her, and even sold her to human traffickers. Mr. Nguyen couldn't bear it, so he killed Lai. However, he continued to abuse his adopted daughter and forced her to give birth to a child for him. Finally, when the daughter brought her boyfriend home to meet her parents, he realized that he could not compare to that guy. However, before things could get worse, the daughter was murdered, her eyes gouged out. Old Nguyen suspected that his old enemy had returned to take revenge, but did not dare to report to the police for fear of revealing his identity. Second secret, Wu Yi. Wu Yi is not the biological son of his current parents. In 1995, Wu Yi's biological parents were brutally murdered by a criminal couple. At that time, Wu Yi was only 6 years old, and witnessed the horrific case with his own eyes, which caused him to suffer from a serious mental illness. He became silent, stopped talking, and developed strange behaviors. However, Wu Yi still retained the memory of the murderous couple's voices. When he grew up, he planned his revenge, tracked down and started a relationship with his enemy's daughter. At the hotel, Wu Yi and Old Nguyen sat drinking. In Old Nguyen's moutai, Wu Yi put a dose of sedatives, just enough to make him unconscious. At first, Wu Yi planned to return to the Nguyen family, taking advantage of their father-son relationship to find evidence of his crimes. But unexpectedly, he accidentally witnessed a drama. Wu Yi saw with his own eyes, Teacher Gua harassing, beating and finally killing Nguyen. After he left, Wu Yi took Nguyen's eyes, sneaked into Teacher Gua's house, put the eyes in a glass jar and put them in the freezer. When Old Nguyen learned from Mao's testimony that Teacher Gua had met Nguyen, he was furious and went to settle the score. Wu Yi was secretly watching because he knew that if Old Nguyen questioned him about the eyes, Teacher Gua would panic and confess. If that happened, the secret about the eyes would be exposed. Wu Yi needed someone to take the blame, and Old Nguyen was the perfect candidate. He had calculated that he only needed to let Old Nguyen kill Teacher Gua, then push the responsibility onto him, and he would escape safely. Unexpectedly, Old Nguyen was so stupid, taking all the blame upon himself. Wu Yi finished his glass of wine. His story, 70% was true, 25% was fiction, the remaining 5% had not yet come to an end.